everyone, it's Katerina. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm painting this mountains sunset landscape. This is a very simple project. If you are new to my channel, I'm still a beginner when it comes to watercoloring and I had absolutely no problems painting this. Well, some products were misbehaving, but painting the mountains was very simple. I'm going to be using a tall card base, therefore I cut my watercolor cardstock to that size. But you can use whatever size you want. I will have an example for you at the end in the size A6. The products I'm using in my videos you can always find in the corresponding blog post on my website. The link is in the description below. Just remember, you don't need to have these exact brands. This is just what I had in my stash. I taped my cardstock onto a board using a painter's tape, and I applied a clean water all over the paper until I covered the whole panel. The paper should be shiny or glossy, but the water should not be pooling. If you apply too much water, just use a paper towel to soak it up. I started first working on the sky. I'm using here pink and orange, but you can use purples, blues. Just look up photos of sunsets for inspiration. First, I diluted the paint with water in a mixing pan, and then I applied the color onto the paper. I started with the orange, which, thinking about it now, I actually wanted to start with a pink and then add a little bit of orange. Oh well, I can do that on my next painting. It was also a little bit too saturated. I will be fixing it a little bit later. If you want your paint to be less saturated, mix less paint with water or just put less paint onto your brush. Next, I added the pink, a few strokes here and there. As you see, I did not cover the whole cardstock. Since the bottom half is going to be covered by mountains, it wasn't really necessary to cover it. So towards the middle, I was feigning the color out, just using a clean brush. As the colors were quite saturated, I used a clean flat brush to soak up a little bit of the color. The brush was slightly damp, it wasn't a dry brush, so after I picked up the color, I cleaned it onto a paper towel, and then I came back and soaked up more of the color. The brush also blended the orange and pink and it made the colors much smoother, which looked really nice. I still added a little bit more of the pink and orange towards the middle, especially to make sure that there is a color around the sides of the first mountain that I'm going to paint. Once I was happy with the sky, I used my heat tool to dry it up. If you don't have such a tool, just let it air dry. After the paper was dry, I started painting the mountains. In my mixing palette, I diluted blue paint with water. The idea here is to go from the lightest color to the darkest. So I mixed first very light blue and I painted in the first mountain. I applied 2 layers of the color as it was a little bit too light. And I didn't go with the color completely to the bottom because that's going to be covered with the mountains in front. Next, I painted the second layer of the mountains. First, I painted the line on the top. This is more like a guide. And then I filled it in with a color that is slightly darker than the shade before. I still needed to apply a second layer to make it a little bit more darker to cover the side of the mountain behind. You don't have to add the second layer of the color if you are happy how it looks. Also, I wanted the middle hill to have lines on each side for more definition. I still have to experiment with that. When I painted this for the first time, I created it by accident and I liked it. Usually people paint each set of the hills in one shade, which is nice as well, but I kind of like the definition of the middle hill. After the second mountain layer was dry, I painted a third set of mountains, again using slightly darker blue paint. As I mentioned at the beginning, some products were misbehaving. The first one was the painter's tape. It just would not hold, especially when I used the heat tool. It's a new cheap painter's tape that I bought recently and I bought a pack of 3. And I also had problems with the cardstock. This is the Canson XL, which is a cheap cardstock. Previously, when using this cardstock, I felt that the water usually sits on top of the cardstock. But this one was drying up like crazy, so I had some streaks in the paint. If you want to have better results and smooth colors, you probably need to use the expensive 100% cotton watercolor cardstock. I'm not sure if this is the case. I have never used this kind of cardstock simply because I just don't mind and don't really care. But I'm also not trying to be a watercolor artist. I'm just a crafter, a card maker who time to time likes to paint from scratch instead of using stamps. Anyways, I painted also the fourth layer of the mountains, which is mostly covered by the last layer. that is low on the left side and goes high up on the right side. To mimic small trees on the last layer, after I painted the initial mountain, I came back and I did these small zigzag strokes to make it look like the mountain is covered by trees, but again, this is optional. You can create the layout of the mountains any way you want. You can sketch it out before you paint them. I actually made a sketch on my iPad Pro, or you can just go for it without any sketch. Once everything was dry, I painted in a few trees at the bottom right corner using black paint. 3 trees to be more precise. I'm still not the best painting the trees, but I think I'm slightly improving. I painted something similar for my first card of this year. If you want, you can check it out. When painting the branches, I'm no longer doing short strokes. I'm painting something like dots, going like in a dotty motion. The trees are another thing that are optional. You could completely leave it out, or you could cover the whole bottom part with trees or make the trees taller. It is all up to you. Actually, there are so many options you can do, not only with the trees, but with the mountains and how you position them, and also the sky just by using different colors or adding sun or moon with stars. So I finished the trees and then I let it dry, obviously, and then I removed the painter's tape. And because the top part with the sky was quite empty, I decided to paint in a few birds. This is super simple. Here I have an example for you. All you do is 2 strokes that you join together. You can paint the bird with wings that are spread out or wings that are up or down. I painted the birds using a small brush and black paint. I painted the 3 birds on the top left side because in a bit I will be adding a sentiment on the other side. You don't have to add a sentiment if you don't want to, but I like to add it to my cards. And I'm using here a small happy birthday stamp that I attached onto an acrylic block, and I stamped it in the top right side of the panel using a black ink. And lastly, I adhered the panel on top of a card base using a double-sided tape. I bought these card bases already pre-cut and pre-scored, but you can make them also yourself. And the card is done. Before I show you the finished card, I also painted 2 cards in the size A6. First, I have here the same layout I did on the tall card. I think it looks just as good, so you don't really need to be restricted to what you see in these videos. You can use colors and sizes that suit you. And also I made a landscape card with a purple sky, and the mountains I only painted at the bottom. This is one of the simplest versions you can paint and it's super quick. I was actually planning to show you the whole painting of this card, but it would make the video way too long. Maybe I will make a bonus video. And lastly, here is the tall card. I really like it. It's such a fun project. I will definitely do more of these with different patterns and colors. And I hope you will try to paint it as well. If you like this card, I would really appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you would like to see more inspirations with cards that I painted from scratch, just click on the playlist that is on your screens now. You will also find a link to this playlist in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.